Oral reading practice with a teacher's feedback is the #1 way to move a kid from here to here on the reading achievement Richter scale. And part of the reason I think we don't get in enough oral reading practice is we haven't kind of come up with a new routine after round robin died. And many of you have probably been told, well, you shouldn't do round robin reading, right? What are the problems with round robin? First of all, round robin presents the limited practice per student. If you have 28 kids in the class and each one's taking a turn, and even if you read for 30 minutes, are they going to even be able to get to 1 minute? Not likely. Many kids are embarrassed, and if they're not embarrassed, they may be bored. They're probably not following along while the other kids reading. Maybe they're looking out the window or passing notes. There's a limited accountability with this model. And in other words, did they actually read? Can you ensure that they have read? Are you asking them the questions to make sure that their eyes are following along? And even if they're listening to the story, they may not have their eyes on print. So that's some benefit to hear the story, but not having the eyes on print reduces their growth as in their word identification abilities, which for struggling readers is their #1 issue. And then there's limited teacher feedback. So even if little Sally makes a mistake, someone else is probably going to pop in with the answer, and the teacher can't coach her as the teacher knows she needs coaching. And so the most important thing that the National Reading Panel found, that importance of feedback with practice, is probably not happening in round robin. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about round robin reading reborn. I was doing a professional development session recently, and some teachers said that they were not able to have turns in their small group sessions. So I consider small groups to be very different than whole groups. So round robin of 28 kids, 25 kids, to me is very different than turn taking with 4 or 5 kids. I'm going to present to you a model of reading in small groups that does not have to be lacking those things that round robin reading does. So we don't have to have limited feedback. We don't have to have limited accountability. We don't have to have limited practice opportunities. So this is a set of strategic routines that I'm going to recommend to you that will allow you to save time and also accelerate readers more quickly. So here are some principles that I think can guide a small group reading instructional session so that you can increase the amount of words that each child reads with feedback and have that repeated reading as the National Reading Panel suggested. So first of all, match your text with word work. In other words, if you are having your kids learn the short vowel A and the short vowel I, read a text that has the short vowel A and the short vowel I in a lot of places so they get the transferability. And that's one big time saver. If you go straight from a word work lesson on short A and short I, reviewing those sounds, and then you read a passage that has only 1 or 2 short vowel words and then a lot of high frequency words and a lot of irregular words like a lot of level texts have, you're just not going to get the transfer. Okay, so that's kind of the groundwork for what I'm talking about. And it'll also ensure that you're getting the student's most pressing need. If they need to learn at this stage short vowels, then give them the practice for that. Later on, they'll move up the continuum and target a particular long vowel. And in our example, you'll see that. Now, here's the one thing that some people might interpret as round reading. I do not believe it has to be as negative as round reading, because you are there as a teacher watching all the kids read, and you can encourage them to follow along by pointing at their text and telling them that you are going to ask them to follow with their eyes. Maybe they can even hold a bookmark under the text and move down the page as their friend reads. So if one child is reading at one time and the others are following with the same text, this gives the teacher the opportunity to give that super important individualized feedback so that the student can blend as you read, something we talk here a lot about at Read Simplified, which is so helpful for getting kids off the ground rapidly. Then the teacher can give that specific feedback, or the teacher can give the phonics feedback that they need, or the teacher can give using context feedback. So I think getting each kid to read with the teacher zooming in on the feedback for that specific child's needs for that moment, 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 kids, is a great instructional routine. And here are some reasons that it's not going to have the same risks as a traditional whole group, whole class round robin. So one thing you can do is to have random turn taking so that you don't just go from here to here to here. So one thing that you could do is maybe play a game, or for instance, you could have a joker card and just play that card randomly. And so someone might be in the middle of a sentence or might be at the end of the sentence, and then you lay the joker card at somebody else's table and they know that they need to pick up immediately right there. So it's one way of holding them accountable. They're in that small group and that can do it. So when you are able to give that feedback to each student one after the other, then they're going to get the 2 core decoding strategies that they need: blend as you read and flex it. If you go to readingsimplified.com/start-here, you can find out about read it and the blend as you read decoding strategy, which is so important for those beginners. So you can hold them accountable that way. There's other ways to hold them accountable, and we'll get into that through the rereading. Then after the students read the passage, it can be a short passage, and that way everybody gets enough practice, and then there's time for the repeated reading. Then the teacher models fluent reading, and the students follow along, and they get the second wave of that text. So it's extra practice. It's the repetition that the National Reading Panel and many research studies have found is necessary. And there's that modeling of good reading. So one of the concerns about round robin, well, those kids are stuttering through it. It's not a good example, not good modeling. Well, we can follow it up with a model by the teacher, okay? Then that would be the second read. Then the third read would maybe the students can choral read. They've done the first read through, they've practiced their decoding, and maybe all together in a quiet choral reading with the teacher being most dominant to give them the fluent example. They could do that to kind of end their lesson with the teacher that day. Then they could go off and read it independently, or with a buddy, or with a teaching assistant, or a volunteer, or with a headset from the computer. Sometimes I record myself with voice memos and just send that off with an iPod with children so that they get more repetition. And that's a super important part of this routine. It comes back to that accountability. So not only are you asking them to follow along when they're there with you, but you want them to master that text by tomorrow. And that's where the rereading the power of the rereading really kicks in, and that's also how you get so much growth with those kiddos. They will get better with their decoding if they master that text. They will get better with those high frequency sight words that are in that text, and they will become more fluent and getting their phrasing right. So that is a kind of a radical alteration from mainstream approach right now, because we typically are saying, I hear this from teachers a lot, I normally have them reread it once and then we don't revisit it, or maybe we reread it once a day for a few days. But if they get a high dosage in one day of rereading that short little text, it will amaze you how quickly they will absorb the high frequency sight words, how quickly their fluency will grow, and of course their short vowel knowledge or their long vowel knowledge, it will also go through the roof. So then that's where the accountability kicks in. You ask them the next day to come to you with the text and you listen to them read it. Maybe they read it all here after rereading as a choral group again, and you just spot check, listening carefully to see who's stumbling and who's not. Maybe showcase one or two students individually really quickly afterwards. So it can be a quick check of seeing if they did what they were supposed to do when they went out into their small group time, or their like their literacy centers, or homework. If you have some kids that are doing homework at home, homework reading. Now, if it's too hard for one kid and everyone else is succeeding, then reduce the task for that child, or give that child extra TLC. Maybe more time with you, maybe more time with a reading assistant, maybe more time with a device to listen along and hear that good modeling. Maybe they read that before they come into the session when they read that passage fresh, so that if it's really a struggle for them and they're demotivated, then you can massage the situation to make sure that they are keeping up with their peers. So I want you to consider this instructional routine and say goodbye to round robin, but still incorporate some of the characteristics that are good with round robin in giving each child an opportunity to get the teacher support, but doing it in a way that is strategic and get so much practice in so that the kids come to you the next day successful with yesterday's passage. They've got a lot more high frequency words and they are ready to go.